Growing up, I was often the only Black person in the room. And I learned very early on that expressing my views on race and racism around white people was strongly discouraged and often came with unfortunate consequences. So I want to thank you for encouraging this dialogue today. Thank you in particular to Swami Ramananda and the folks at the Integral Yoga Institute in San Francisco for putting on this event. To Abaya, who reached out to me. Thank you to Mazin for your healing and consciousness raising work. And thank you to the Ohlone people for being the original guardians of the land where I am now and where I've lived for over 20 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Berkeley, in San Francisco, and now in Oakland. So before we move into how to respond to racism from a spiritual perspective, I want to start by talking about what spirituality is. Then I want to talk about what racism is. And then I'll conclude with what a spiritual response to racism can look like. A lot of people who ask me about what spirituality is, a lot of people who've come to me have this idea that being spiritual is about being peaceful. But that idea of spirituality just turns spirituality into wanting to get from here, now, where you are, to there, where you want to be, where you think you should be. It becomes resisting this present moment experience and instead trying to match some image that the mind's created called peace or serenity or enlightenment. But as we talk today, I want you to think about spirituality as turning toward whatever is happening now. Turning toward whatever is happening now. Whatever is happening in the body, in your experience, without trying to get rid of it, fix it, change it, or make it match some idea or image of peace. Whatever you find within, whether it's shame, discomfort, fear, spirituality's invitation is for you to turn toward it, to infuse your present moment experience with the curious, loving, and warm awareness, to not resist it, but to accept it. And when you look within, if you find resistance or non-acceptance, to welcome that too, to not make that wrong either, to allow the non-allowing, to accept the lack of acceptance, which then allows you to access a much deeper kind of peace. It's a peace in which even moments of difficulty and discomfort, of resistance and non-acceptance are held in the loving arms of awareness. It's drenching your present moment experience, whatever it is, with unconditional love, welcoming, and curiosity. Because that's what I'm calling spirituality. The understanding that everything that's happening within you is spiritual. Even the shame, the ugly thought, the discomfort. And then paradoxically, when you welcome, bless, allow, accept it all, that's when the real possibility of being truly at peace arises. Not a peace that's the opposite of conflict or struggle, but a peace that can hold the conflict and struggle, a peace that's bigger than that. A peace that's bigger than the mind can conceptualize or understand. So that's the perspective I'm inviting you to take today as we talk, and after today, as you look within. And when it comes to responding to racism, I'm very much inspired by Gandhi and his spiritual approach to social change, which he called non-cooperation. And this brings us to the social change we're here to talk about today. The social change that's so urgently needed. But before we do that, I want to point out that this urgency isn't anything new. This isn't anything new. These protests we've been seeing over these last 3 weeks aren't about anything new. Widely circulated images, videos, and news clips capturing the brutalization and killing of Black and brown bodies isn't anything new. Proof of police taking the lives of Black and brown bodies without facing significant, if any, consequences isn't anything new. The murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Nina Pop, Tony McDade, David McAtee, Drejon Sean Reed, Maurice Gordon, Rayshard Brooks. All of these murders, all of which happened over the last 2 months, and so many others, isn't anything new. What I think is new is that all of these most recent videos and murders happened after March 11th, when the pandemic was declared, and many of us were already more attuned to grief and uncertainty. And at the same time, we were less distracted by work and our usual daily lives. But the urgency isn't anything new. So before we go into what responding to racism looks like, before we go into what it looks like to be non-cooperative today, let's talk about what I mean when I say racism and white supremacy. When many white people hear the words racism and white supremacy, their minds go to conscious hate, neo-Nazis, the Klan, white supremacists. But that's different. White supremacy is more than just hate and prejudice. White supremacy is a structure of social and institutional violence. It's a structure that harms and oppresses people of color by devaluing their needs, desires, and lives, valuing them as less than those of white people. White supremacists are simply one response to that system. It's a response that basically says yes or more to this system of white supremacy that's already here. But another, much more common response to the system of white supremacy, the response that I want to challenge today, is to view white supremacists with disdain or disgust while doing nothing about the system itself. To say, I'm not like them, and to think that's good enough, or to be extra friendly and kind to the next Black person who happens to cross your path and think that's enough, or to only meditate or pray or send thoughts and condolences and think that's enough. But those aren't enough. What's needed is non-cooperation. What's needed is for you to actively swim against the current, to swim against the relentless and systemic current of white supremacy. Because if you're not actively swimming against the current, then you're just going along with it. In other words, only when you're actively working toward dismantling white supremacy are you not upholding it. Those are the only two available options. So let's talk a little bit more about how we got here. White supremacy was intentionally baked into this society, into every fiber of this society, from the genocide of Native Americans to the enslavement of African people, to wars created solely to seize the land and territories occupied by people of color, to immigration policies that have disproportionately harmed Latino and Asian immigrants. That is this country's history, and that is the foundation upon which the legal system, financial institutions, the medical system, the military, schools, all institutions within this society were built. And what this means is that if you're white, you benefit from white supremacy, whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not, whether you're aware of it or not. You likely have no idea the level of racism your Black and brown brothers and sisters navigate and face every single day, even in liberal bastions like Manhattan and San Francisco. I have my own stories from here where I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most recently, I was confronted by a white man who I'd never seen before, who just happened to be passing through my predominantly white neighborhood where I've lived for 6 years, who stopped me while I was enjoying the garden I planted in my front yard and demanded to know what I was doing there. Again, the problem isn't this one man. It's the system that shaped his thinking in such a way that I believe he thought he was doing a good thing, a helpful thing, a righteous thing by coming up to me in a neighborhood he didn't know and questioning my right to be there. And when I say that this man and that every white person who isn't actively dismantling white supremacy is actually upholding it, I'm not talking about your character. I'm not talking about your intention. I'm talking about your socialization. The way you were taught consciously, unconsciously, intentionally, unintentionally, through culture, society, education, every institution in this society that you've ever come into contact with, the way you were taught to view the world and the people in it. Because what white supremacy truly needs to continue to exist, to thrive, isn't necessarily Klan members or neo-Nazis or human beings full of hate and rage. It's people going with the flow of the system, going with the flow that the system put in place. And this is why I say, if you're not actively working toward dismantling white supremacy, you're playing a role in upholding it. And I want you to really let that in. If you're not actively working toward dismantling white supremacy, you're playing a role in upholding it. And let in all the feelings that come from hearing that too. Notice any shame, discomfort, disbelieving defensiveness, any indignation or desire to say, no, you're wrong, or not me. Notice whatever it is. Noticing and examining this discomfort is essential if you want to begin dismantling white supremacy. Because if the discomfort goes unquestioned or unexamined, it helps to keep white supremacy in place. And here's how. If you're feeling that discomfort, but don't question or examine it, you'll likely find yourself engaging in unconscious, automatic, habitual, or disconnected action. Actions like insisting that you were taught to treat everyone the same, that you're colorblind, that you don't care if someone is pink or purple or polka dotted. You might cry or point out that you have friends or family members who are people of color, that you have a long history of civil rights activism. Or you might raise what you believe to be a more salient issue like class or gender, or the problem protesters. But any compulsive reaction that's not accompanied by an intentional response to actively dismantling white supremacy helps to keep white supremacy in place. If you're reacting from a place of discomfort more than you're responding to what Black and brown people all over the country are saying and have been saying for generations, you're continuing to play a role in upholding white supremacy. So this is why your practice is so important. This is why using spirituality as a tool of awareness rather than as a way to chase peace is so important. So instead of chasing peace, a peace you can probably find easily if you focus on denying or ignoring or soothing your discomfort. Instead of chasing that peace, the invitation is to turn toward the discomfort, to welcome it, to allow it, to really look at it. Because that awareness of it, that examination of it helps to diminish its power. And then that allows you to look more closely, more honestly at your own thoughts and behaviors, to examine them, to question them, not for the purpose of beating yourself up or getting lost in guilt or shame or self-pity or defensiveness, because that's just another distraction, but for the purpose of then doing the work to begin dismantling racism from the inside out, and then taking the next step of taking wise action to begin dismantling systemic racism, to begin acting in non-cooperation with systemic racism. And so it's with this understanding of spirituality and racism that I offer the following 5 ways that you, as spiritual practitioners, can take wise action. Ways that you can respond to racism and work toward dismantling white supremacy here and now and in each given moment. 1, look within. Notice your internal reaction when your ideas about racism are challenged, particularly when you feel like you're being implicated in white supremacy. Notice any impulse to explain or defend without acting on it. Increase your internal capacity to hold that discomfort. And if you can think back to a time when you acted compulsively in response to that discomfort, or you did something racist, or were called a racist, or treated a person of color with less kindness or respect than you would have if they'd been white, take steps to repair the harm that was caused. The best time to repair any damage you've done is as soon as it happens. The second best time is now. 2, educate yourself. Buy books about racism and anti-racism and read them, discuss them, do the exercises. Follow organizers working for structural change on social media. And then when they say something you doubt or don't understand, research it. Avoid asking Black and brown people to explain the history and implications of race and racism unless that's their job or they're offering themselves up to you for that. 3, practice non-cooperation with the system of white supremacy, not white supremacists. Yes, it's important to call out racism when you see it, but don't spend your energy and resources trying to convince people who refuse to see the harm that white supremacy does to people of all races. Instead, work toward dismantling the system of white supremacy. Focus your energy on your political representatives, schools, healthcare programs, your workplace, organizations that are already working for structural change. Work in systems. 4, put your white privilege to work. You have access, resources, and opportunities that people of color simply don't have. Use them wisely. Use them in ways that break away from systems of power that oppress, and in ways that support structural change. I saw on the news a clip of a Black man halfway between a crowd of protesters and a line of armed police. He was completely alone there, down on one knee, with his head bowed. And a young man came out from the back of the crowd with his hands up in the air and stood his body between the Black man and the line of police. And when asked later by the press whether he was scared, he said, "No, I wasn't scared because of the color of my skin." That's one example of using white privilege can look like. And when you're ready to take action, don't hesitate to get the guidance of Black organizers and activists who've already been doing this work for years. And if you do get their help, be sure you compensate them for their time, their expertise, and their effort. This allows them to help you and continue doing their very important work. And finally, as you start doing the work to dismantle systemic racism, you may feel nervous or hesitant to move forward. You might be scared that you'll say or do something wrong. And I'm here to tell you, you will. You will. So 5 is don't let mistakes, not even big mistakes, stop you. You will absolutely make mistakes. People will tell you that you're causing harm. People will ask you to stop doing what you're doing or to do what you're doing differently. That's part of the learning journey. And when that happens, hold yourself with compassion and listen. Listen. Learn. Repair the damage caused. Adjust your behavior. Then keep going. There's no freedom from mistakes. Mistakes will happen. Discomfort will happen. Use your spiritual practice to manage the discomfort that would otherwise keep you in reaction rather than responding. Use your spiritual practice to manage the fear of making mistakes. Use your spiritual practice to manage the pain and discomfort that comes when you make a mistake and get criticized. Don't let that stop or slow you from continuing to take action. And then keep going. Keep taking action. Keep swimming against the current. Thank you.
Kamala, wow. Thank you so much. I was like doing a little sobbing and crying, I think like 4 minutes into you speaking. Because, when you said like turning towards what's occurring, and turning towards what's happening right now. And it just really invited me to, even in this moment, turn towards what I'm experiencing. And there's an experience of beauty and gratitude in that we're all here and we're all having this conversation. And so much of you have come to listen to us. And also there is an experience of grieving, grieving, how much it's taken for us to come together in this way. How many people have had to die and how much violence we've had to see. And nevertheless, I'm grateful because we're here. And it's really so important what you said, Kamala, about turning towards, because it's so true that in the spiritual field, we can be enlightenment now, like we want to experience this bliss as if we weren't here on earth having a human experience for a very particular reason. And I want to really talk today about authentic action, because as human beings, we love being, and especially in the spiritual world, we're good at being. And from a place of our being, there's an authentic doing as well. And I want to invite you to think about this work of racial justice and this work of engaging in racial justice really as a matter of your own integrity. I want you to think about what are my values? What are your values that when you see racial injustice, when you see these videos of people being murdered, in what way is it out of your integrity to just kind of sit and do nothing about it? And the reason I want to invite us to talk about it that way is because we often engage with this conversation like it's a political issue only. And really, I think at this point, what's clear is it's not a political issue, it's an ethical issue. It's a matter of human rights. It is also political, but prisons and the way that prisons are run is like a form of slavery. It's not like a political opinion whether or not, the way that police treat Black people is okay. It's an ethical question. So I want to talk a little bit about, taking authentic action towards racial justice, almost as if you were thinking of your own dharma. In what way might the privileges and the resources and the things that I have be a part of what I'm here to do, the sacred contribution I'm here to make? What if you were to discover that this was not like a divergence or an add-on to your spiritual path, but a very, very integral part of it? Because I think that that is what's being revealed to all of us right now. So the first thing I want to invite when it comes to taking authentic action, and the reason I'm saying authentic action is because Kamala, you spoke to this so well, and I want to pull out one part, which is there are the things that we think we should do because it looks good, and it's what it's what looks good, and it's like, okay, this is how to be a good white person or a good activist. Let me just follow these, right? And even if it's a good move, if you're doing the right thing, if we're not being and coming from the right place, then even when we win, we kind of, you can do all the right things, but then you just have movements full of doo-doo, as Van Jones says. So authentic action really means that we're checking in with who am I? What are my values, and what is my how can my nature inform the place in this beautiful spectrum of racial justice work that I can engage? And it also is looking at what are my skills and my resources and things that I have available to me, right? That's also a part of our path, our contribution that we can make. And it's also looking at what are the aspects of this that really light me up, that either anger me or inspire me, because that too is a part of where our most authentic contribution can be. So, yeah, even right now, you might even take a moment and just think about it. For me, if there was an aspect of racial justice work, of engaging with what's happening in the world right now, either it's a part of it that's just really breaking my heart, or maybe I'm seeing, defund the police, and I'm seeing all these things, and this or that aspect. I'm seeing like how many young children are out these protests, and how these young kids are growing up in this consciousness. Maybe that's something that really enlivens you about it. But I invite you to notice, because your heart has these receptor sites for certain aspects of this work. And, I want you to really think about, where is this place that I can engage that is really sustainable? Because we need you to be in this for the long run. It can't just be a trend or a fad, like, okay, everyone's talking about it right now. The other thing that I want to talk about is expanding imagination. Because once upon a time, this Zoom call, even just on like a technological level, would not have been a possibility, right? It would not have been something we could have ever imagined 10 years ago, like that 100 people would be on this Zoom call. And 50 or 60 years ago, the idea that two people of Black and African heritage would be on the front of this Zoom call talking to you all about this topic was also probably unimaginable to anyone. And that's not a small thing. The great leaders, and I think of them as our movement ancestors, right? There's a lineage that this work is a part of, and I invite you, as you're looking at what is my authentic contribution to what's happening right now, to actually look at what are the lineages of action, the lineages of these movements. Kamala mentioned Mahatma Gandhi and the kind of strategic nonviolence and non-cooperation. That's a whole lineage of approaches to social change. And there's many, many different lineages and there's many different approaches to this. And one of the most important things that these people and really communities that made these great changes is they had a very visionary imagination for what was possible. And all of us, we need to be imagining what would be possible for my community, my yoga community, my ashram, my organization, my company. What would be possible, and really expanding your imagination. a lot of the conversations right now are about, you might be seeing it, this idea of defunding the police. And it's very interesting because people are like, oh no, I don't know. Oh no, that's not possible. That's too much, right? Maybe reform, right? And I really invite you to think about, what if we were just to suspend the disbelief for a little bit with an idea like that? Because if someone said, yeah, segregation, ending segregation is a little bit much, but why don't we just reform it? Let's just reform slavery. To just end it would be too much. It would be too much on the economy, right? But I want you to imagine right now, if there were a different way to deal with violence and safety and mental illness and, the basics, someone having too much to drink in your neighborhood, right? Someone who any of these things, dealing with homelessness, there were different ways to address that. If you had all this money, that was going to the police, and you could put it somewhere else, based on your values and your vision for the world, where might it go? You could even throw something in the chat if you have an idea. Please, I would love to hear some of people's ideas, possibilities of alternative ways. Education. Mm-hmm. Replace military funding with Peace Corps, education, healthcare for all, free college, reparations, social workers, nature as a teacher, mental health, art in schools, community gardens, free yoga for everybody. Community policing, feeding the children, right? So one thing that I want you to really, and keep them coming, right? But I really invite you to keep your imagination open in this moment, because this is a very important time for the consciousness of our country. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about taking this energy and directing it, but it's really, really important for you, as if you're a leader or a community member, to keep your imagination open about what's possible, large scale and small. And Kamala spoke about perfectionism, or spoke about the comfort and discomfort of this work. And I want to actually speak a little bit about this perfectionism that can kind of get in the way of us moving forward and taking action. Because white supremacy is a system, and it's also a culture. It's a set of ideology, right? And this culture of white supremacy, and really in a lot of ways, I actually think of it as a culture of separation, a culture of this idea that you and I are separate, and that, whiteness was even, as Kamala spoke really good of the history, but one aspect of it is it was created as a system to separate a certain group of people from everyone else, because poor white people in America, poor people of European descent, because they weren't white yet, right? They were indentured servants, and they were working alongside Native American people and indigenous people, right? The majority of people who were brought from Europe here were people who were imprisoned and indentured servants, and the poor and the outcasts of Europe, a lot of them, right? People who were religiously oppressed, a lot of those folks, a lot of the ancestors of the people on this call, right? And they were given a deal. Your life's going to be a little easier, a little more comfortable, but in exchange, you have to give up your culture, give up your lineage, and become white. So the Germanness, the Irishness, and the Italianness and all that stuff cleaned up and become white. So white supremacy, understanding it as a culture, you can also see how it hurts everyone. Because one of the reasons that everybody loves black people, because, people might hate black people, but really everybody loves black people. You have to understand that our culture, of black people is the most potent cultural medicine. One of my real idols, her name is Ruby Sales, a civil rights veteran. She talks about how, the black folk traditions and black culture traditions have saved America from itself, from jazz and funk and rock and blues, right? So one of the reasons people love black people is because of our resilience and our casting off of white supremacy, of this perfectionism culture, and have your stuff together and everything should be neat and tidy in my neighborhood. Really, that's a part of this and racial justice too, I believe, because that culture that's comfortable, right? It's you be that way and you get privilege. It stops us from being vulnerable. It stops you from taking risks, because white supremacy says that it has one of the ideologies of it is perfectionism. This idea that you're supposed to be witty and smart and intellectual about everything all the time. So thank you, Kamala, for talking about the importance of taking chances. And, I want to invite you to make high quality mistakes. High quality mistakes, meaning they're coming from who you really are. That is what makes a huge difference. It's coming from who you really are. But we do need you to learn by doing. And do need you to invest in the education for your organizations, for your families. Kamala mentioned books. I'm going to share some resources in the email as well. But getting uncomfortable, just like in that yoga pose. And you'll know when it's like, this is that nerve pain, like, I should stop. And you'll know when it's like, that's that good stretch. And even then, just recognizing that comfort is like the matrix. And when you're getting uncomfortable and outside of your comfort zone, it's very, very likely that's when the work has begun. So another thing that I want to talk about, Kamala, you spoke so well about how we're often not aware of our privilege. And I even have to do recognition work of my privilege, because I'm educated and I can speak like this in a way that doesn't sound intimidating to people. And there's so many different nuances to it. And one of the things about privilege is that you don't need to think of it as a thing that you have, right? Like, I've got privilege, like it's like a disease or something. Think of it as an experience, and it's contextual. And you have privilege always, and it varies based on where you are. And one of the forms of resistance that people have around accepting that they have this privilege is when they think it's like black and white, and that it's like, well, it's not my fault, right? If you ever have had that thought, it's not my fault to have this privilege. And I want us to shift away from this conversation about fault and blame into a conversation about responsibility. Because for me, I wouldn't say that it's my fault that I have the privilege I have as a man, as a person with an education, but I do recognize that it's my responsibility to use that privilege. Coming back to this question of, what if it were part of your dharma to use your privilege towards making the world a better place? Towards making a world where the things that you value and think are beautiful are accessible to everyone. Yeah. Taking action from who you really are is really the heart of what I want you to leave from here, because if you are even on this call, I imagine that there's something that's really, really important to you about this. There's something about what's been happening, something about the call that Swami Ramananda and the folks at Integral made that awakened something in you, and you're like, I need to be there. And I really want you to hold on to that, because it's very sacred and it's very, very powerful. And that's a place that you can do something really beautiful from. And from there, I want you to really imagine what would be possible for our world with you as a part of this team, this movement. And really imagining what this moment could mean for our country and our world. For the future generations that are coming. I want you to imagine, your ancestors, because some of them were freedom fighters. Maybe you have to go all the way back to medieval Europe, but you have ancestors who had an imagination for what would be possible for you. And what do you imagine What do you see? What do you hope for the future generations to come? What kind of world do you want them to grow up in? And what small contribution do you want to make to that? Or huge contribution? Mm-hmm. So I really just want to leave you all with this sense that there's really something beautiful that's possible from you when it comes to racial justice. There's actually a very unique contribution based on who you are and what you value, your unique skills, and the things that are important to you. And I also want to remind you that to sit and not answer that call, you're going to suffer. Sorry, I can't break it to you. I'll keep it real with you. But really, I know that if you're on this call, you know what it's like for something to be important to you and to not respond. So this is a matter of ethics. It's a matter of integrity for us all. So we lean in. Lean in. This is no different than any other spiritual experience you've had. It's just like, when you wanted to learn how to do that crow and, it was the first crow pose you ever got, right? Or when you were working with whatever insecurity you had. Lean in and imagine just what would be possible for you to contribute here from who you really are. So that's the heart of what I want to share with you all. And I also really want to just reiterate the power of this conversation we're having right now, because there's a lot of energy right now, and this is great. And one of the things that is very important is to remember that this energy needs to be moved into action on a larger scale. So I want to reiterate the importance of this conversation around defunding police and redirecting these funds and these resources, and really our understanding of what the role of police is in our community. That's a really important conversation. And I want you to have this conversation with your family members. I want you to sit around with your family and your friends. And even one game you can play is called And Then. And you all just tell a story together, right? So whatever your city is, I'm in Oakland, right? So Oakland has decided to take half of the police budget, and we're going to put it to education, and we're going to put it to nonviolent response to emergencies. And then you pass it on to the person to your left, and let them imagine, and they'll say, oh yeah, and then all the schools, the kids learned about racism and how to have nonviolent communication, and pass it around. Get it in an imaginative exercise with your community, because we need to, as a country, really seize this moment. The second thing I invite you to do is think about, where is your money and how is it aligning and not aligning with what's going on? Because a lot of the banks that we bank at and a lot of the companies that we shop at are actually have investments in the prison industrial complex. And the simple version of that, which is, it's huge. And I want you to, someone mentioned the documentary 13th, but we have prisons in America, in California, the prisons, charge the state $81,000 per inmate per year. $81,000, right? So there's this huge economic incentive to be putting more and more people into the prisons, into this prison pipeline. It's a very lucrative industry. Unfortunately, a lot of it's privatized. So I just want to make that connection for you. A conversation about ending police brutality is also a conversation about ending these, very unjust prison systems, because the police are very incentivized to be sending people into that system. So I invite you to learn about that as well, and think about, as a matter of personal integrity, is there a way I can have my money and my energy pulling out and divesting from these systems and put towards, whether it's a credit union, and these kinds of things are also important things. Someone mentioned $81K a year as a Harvard MBA. Yeah, it is. So that's another way that we can redirect the energy that we have as a community. So, in conclusion, take action from who you are. bring that into your community. You know, I really invite you to get messy and bring these conversations and bring that imaginative space. Have compassion with the people around you too, because they're going to have their mistakes that they need to make. So create a space where you all can make mistakes together, you know, high quality mistakes. And it's really, really important right now that we engage in this conversation about, is this system of policing really working for us? You know, and is it time for us as a community to see what we can create together as an alternative that serves and is safe for everyone? Thank you.
We have one question that I think we can make time for. Otherwise, I want us to spend the rest of our time in breakout groups. But Reverend Kamala and Mazin, we have a question that I'd like both of you to answer briefly, if you would. The question is, over the years, the questioner has noticed that there are very few African-American people involved in yoga communities. And they're asking if you, the speakers, have any insight into the reasons for that. Maybe Reverend Kamala, you could go first.
Yeah, thank you for that question. My experience has been that it's not that there aren't people of color involved in yoga or in yoga communities, but there are certain yoga communities that you don't find a lot of people of color. There are yoga communities that are tremendously diverse. I am in an enormous community of Black yoga teachers. So that's just the teachers, not even the practitioners, thousands of members. And I'm very actively involved in there. So what I would look at, rather than why aren't people of color coming to yoga, I would ask myself, why aren't people of color coming to my yoga studio? I think that's the question.
Yeah, I could not have said it any better. Thank you so much, Kamala. Black people love yoga. People of color love yoga. We love meditating. We love all this stuff. Speaking to that as well, yeah, there's a way. What I want to do is I want to just share something as a place to start with this, right? There's a culture that every yoga studio has. It's a vibe, it's an energy, right? And it might on certain levels feel really good and really welcoming. And then there are like certain frequency levels that you might not be aware of because you're used to it. And that's like kind of that like the white supremacy culture stuff. And what I invite you to do is talk to people in your community and ask them, get some feedback. Like, why aren't you coming? Like, it might not be very comfortable to hear why they're not coming. And people might have some feelings. Someone said like the core power vibe. You know, it's any space where you're not seeing people of color and there are people of color there. That's the vibe. It's not just core power. I'm sorry. A lot of the really beautiful studios that have really good intentions and are really great people. It's like, once again, we live in an ocean of this problem of systemic racism. So just being neutral and awesome is not enough, but there has to be active, proactive steps that you're taking to invite people, because there's a history of them coming to all white spaces and not feeling safe or welcome, right? And so there's a proactive, it's not just waiting around like, why aren't people of color coming to us? We love you guys, come on. But it's like going out of your way to ask folks, what would you need to feel like this is home for you?
And Kamala and Mazin in particular for articulating things that we really need to hear and consider. And I'll invite Mazin now to lead us in a closing meditation.
Just consider all of the people on this call and hold them in your heart. Let's be grateful for this moment, this gathering of people. Taking a nice deep breath wherever you are in your breath now. And exhaling completely. And breathing again deeply. And exhaling again. letting your breath return to normal. I invite you to bring your awareness to the back of your body, the back of your head and the back of your neck, the back of your shoulders and heart, your lower back and the back of your seat and your legs. With this, I want you to invite into this moment the wisdom and the learning from the mistakes and the successes of all your ancestors. The mistakes, the successes, the beautiful and otherwise, all of that has formed a great wisdom that you can draw from. You might even imagine some of their hands gently resting on your back and reinforcing you, giving you courage to face your discomfort as you turn towards this moment and you turn towards the call to create a better world. And imagine your ancestors who are now dead, and they've left some of their ignorances with them, let's hope. They're holding hands with the ancestors of all the others on this call. And around this country and around this world, our ancestors are holding hands and encircling. All the blessings in our life are answered prayers and dreams come true for someone in your lineage who wanted a better future for you. And I want you to now bring your awareness to the front side of your body, your face, your neck, your chest, your arms, your pelvis, and your legs. We are in a deeper field encircling our world. Our ancestors behind us and before us are all the future generations. The children born and unborn. And I invite you to let a seed be planted in your heart right now. A seed to lean in to your next edge of growth in this domain. Maybe it's to learn and to expand your knowledge. Maybe it's to put your knowledge into action and be vulnerable and courageous and try things. Or maybe it's to deepen your compassion in the work that you already do so you can be more effective in changing people's consciousness. Whatever it is, let your love for future generations and the wisdom of your ancestors water this seed in your heart. And I ask you now, are you willing to say yes to the possibility of what you can contribute to this movement? If that yes is a strong yes, great. If it's not, that's okay. But just notice. And taking a nice big exhale. Another inhale deep. And letting it go. Acknowledging yourself for being here today, for stepping outside of the norm. Having gratitude to all of the others who came on this call, for all of our ancestors and future generations, having gratitude to all the great teachers who we know and we don't know who have brought the medicine of yoga and many other medicines to us. Giving thanks to the indigenous people of the land that we are on for stewarding, and all the people who steward that land. Giving thanks to the earth and the great mystery beyond.